All right, so I know there'll still be a couple people coming in. I know it's only a couple minutes past noon, but we're going to go ahead and get started just to make sure that we have time to hit all the topics that we have planned today. So just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We are really excited to share this with you on, how we respond to disclosures, and it's not our job to investigate, it's just our job to report. So I wanted to start with some housekeeping at the very beginning. Of course, this is the very end of Child Abuse Prevention Month, so this is why we're doing this, but of course we're here all year long. And while we are discussing reporting and what to report in terms of child abuse and neglect, just want to make sure everyone has the number for the 24/7 DHS hotline. It's going to be 1-800-522-3511. So if at any time, if you've learned new information today, or if you have any questions, or there's something that you think you need to report, utilize that hotline. And if there is imminent danger, contact 911. And we'll leave that information in the chat box as we get going, and we'll bring it up multiple times, I'm sure, throughout the presentation. So before we get into the topics, I do want to do some introductions. So my name is Tara Evans. I'm the Educational Outreach Coordinator, and we'll go ahead and start next with Ronnie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ronnie Roney, and I am one of the Victim Support Coordinators here at the Abbott House.
And Candy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Candy Wampler. I'm the Medical Director and the Nurse Practitioner here at the Abbott House.
And Casey.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Burgess, and I am a forensic interviewer here at Abbott House.
And Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. I am Jennifer Skinner. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here, and I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions in there and I'll alert everybody.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for being here. So we're going to start with our first topic, which is, what do I actually report? So the main purpose of our panel today is to discuss proper reporting procedure, but we do want to go over the forms of child abuse that we are required to report here in Oklahoma. So Ronnie, will you start us off with physical abuse?
Sure. So there are multiple different types of abuse. All need to be reported. And when we talk about physical abuse, we're talking about the non-accidental injuries. So when you see a child and you see bruises or bumps or scrapes or anything that kind of stands out to you that there's no way that could have been an accident, that would be something that you would need to report. Or if a child talks to you and says, this happened because of this, and it was something that was actually done to them by another person and not an accident, then that needs to be reported. We recommend you report to police first, because that's going to get the quickest response time. And then there does need to be, like Tara said earlier, we are mandated reporters, so we do all need to report to DHS. And we'll say this a lot, it's not our job to investigate, it's our job to report. So no matter if we're not sure of this or that, whatever details you have, call and let people know, because sometimes you might be the only one that that child has been able to talk to, or happens to see that bruise or something that maybe is normally covered up. So just report it, because these kids need us in the community looking out for them, because sometimes the people that are charged to be their caregivers are not looking out for them. They're the exact opposite of that. So I challenge everyone to just be more mindful and be looking out for any kiddos that are involved in your life. Be looking for those things.
Thank you. Do you mind talking to us also about sexual abuse and neglect? Because I know those are the other forms that we need to make sure we're reporting.
Yeah, sure. So physical abuse, I guess they would call that like the most like outward, you being able to see that a child's going through some physical abuse, but not all physical abuse is being able to be seen by the naked eye. That's why we have people like Candy here on staff, where she sees stuff that would have never known that was going to be considered physical abuse. So there's also sexual abuse and neglect. If a kid is not being taken care of, food, shelter, clothing, all of those things that could be considered neglect. And so that, again, needs to be called into DHS, reported, and let them investigate, because then they go out to the homes and they look at this home that they're living in, and they're required, the families at that point are required to show food in their cabinets, food in their fridge, required to show their bedroom that they sleep in, the bathrooms that they go to the bathroom in, and different things like that. And if they're not able to show those things, then that's when DHS will decide if it's unsafe to keep a kid living in those situations. So that's kind of what neglect looks like. You could see like a really dirty child. It could be just a really skinny kid. You know, some of us are skinny whether we eat tons or not, but still, just things, if it's standing out to you, report it. Let them decide if it's something else. And then when it comes to sexual abuse, that's usually something that's disclosed, but not all kids disclose it automatically. It could be different things that they say that might make you think, oh my gosh, is something going on with this kid? But yes, sexual abuse definitely, and I know Candy will talk about this later, but that definitely needs to be reported to the police so that they can have a quicker turnaround of trying to get that investigated. And then also to DHS for sure. But there are certain time frames Candy will talk about when it comes to sexual abuse that are really pertinent in order to get kids the help that they need, not just for an investigation, but for their overall health. And Candy and all of us at Abbott House are very, that's our number one priority. We're child first. We're child centered. We want these kids to be taken care of. And yes, we want justice. We want to make sure that like all the pieces are put together to try to help, prosecute these bad guys, so to speak. But we just want kids to get better. We want to help them on a path to healing. And so just be looking for those different signs and symptoms of those types of things. And always police and DHS, just report and let them figure it out.
I have a few things to add on that.
Yeah.
So we also see kiddos if they're drug endangered and also witnesses to crime. So it's not just physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence and neglect. If a kid is any way exposed to any drugs, and then also if they've witnessed a crime as well, want to make sure to report that as well.
Thank you so much. And when we talk about reporting, so what if I just make an internal report to my supervisor? Does that mean I still have to report to DHS or law enforcement because I've told someone what's going on?
Right. Yes, you still have to report to DHS and or law enforcement, because as much as we want to trust the people that are higher up in all of our organizations, if DHS gets 3 reports of the same thing, that's fine. That actually kind of shows a little bit more legitimacy to it, and that more people have seen this or heard about it. And so still report, because what if they just forgot or they just didn't do it, and they're, you just never know. So you always need to report. It's a great thing. You've got to tell the people in your organizations, the higher ups, what's going on. They do need to know, but it still needs to be reported to DHS and law enforcement. And I wanted to speak to something. I actually got a call the other day from just a community member here in Norman, and they had actually seen some physical abuse just right there in front of their eyes at like a ballpark. And they were asking, what do I do? And that was a really great question. In the moment, she didn't know what to do, and it was after the fact, but I was like, you could always call 911 if you're seeing that happening. And I guess she tried to talk to them and say, hey, like, let's not do that, but they weren't listening. So call 911. All that matters is the kid's safety. And my mom used to tell me this all the time. You can apologize later. Like, say you saw something or whatever, you can always apologize later. But if this is something that's happening for real, you can't ever take that back. You're not reporting it. So call 911 if you see something happening then and there. If they get in a car, get their tag number, try to write down their make and model of their car. Different things like that can help. Sorry about that. So just because, DHS, they need the address, they need phone numbers, they need a lot more, DHS does, but law enforcement, they just need a few things to be able to try to track some people down. So
and also for future purposes, when I am in an interview with a child, I want to make sure that I know who all that kid is disclosed to, what was disclosed, because the ultimate goal of a CAC is to have, to be able to have a child tell one person. And so that way they're not re-traumatized by telling multiple people. So, and so eventually, like law enforcement, DHS will want to follow up with anybody that the kid is disclosed to. So just automatically starting out with going ahead and telling DHS and law enforcement is always probably the best option to go to anyways, because it will come circle around if I do get to talk to a child and they tell me that they've disclosed to you.
That's a great point. And I think it's also important to mention that in the state of Oklahoma, since we are all mandated reporters, there's no penalty for reporting based on suspicion. In fact, we're encouraged to, because we don't want to go in and ask all those questions. And we'll talk about that in a minute with disclosures and how to handle it. But that is the purpose, is that we report anything that feels off, or if we notice anything, because that's what law enforcement and DHS are there for. They're going to investigate, and there's no penalty to us, because there are situations where I was suspicious and I made a report and maybe they didn't find anything, but it's the fact that we still made that report, so then we can find out, yes, there was nothing going on and this child's still safe. So that's also another really good point. And that kind of leads us into our next topic, which is, how do I handle a disclosure? So
before you move on, Tara, I'm so sorry. Before you move on, we do have a question. Okay. Angela is saying, Casey referred to a CAC. Can you please define what that is?
Yeah. Casey, do you want to explain?
I can take that away. So a CAC is a child advocacy center, and that's what we are here at Abbott House. And so we are a neutral place where kiddos can come and talk to. Yes, we do have partnerships with law enforcement and DHS, but we're ultimately here for the kid first. And so a CAC is making sure that the kid is getting all the services that they need, whether that be counseling, medical services. That is what a CAC covers. So yeah, it's a child advocacy center.
Perfect. And we kind of like to say at Abbott House that we're literally the house that brings everyone together. It makes it really sweet and simple, but that is definitely the goal, is that everything we do is to conform to the child and the family's needs, versus in other settings where it might be, well, this is standard, this is procedure. It doesn't always have the same level of comfort that a child advocacy center does. So thank you, Casey. And so when we actually talk about handling disclosures, so our initial instinct might be to console the child or change the subject, or alternatively, we might ask too many questions and we might want to find out more information and keep pressing them. So what's the best way that we can handle this situation that's going to be helpful for the child, but also helpful for when we make that report? Casey?
Yeah. So I have a few things on this topic. So when handling a disclosure, first and foremost, you have to understand that child has chosen you to be a safe person to talk to. And ultimately, your reaction is going to affect the way that the whole investigation continues. So we want you to stay calm, stay relaxed, because that reaction is such a big deal to those kiddos. They're afraid that you're going to think differently of them, or they're expecting a different reaction. And you have to think about your daily interactions with kids in general, even your kids at home. How do you react to when they tell you something that they've done? And so making sure you're going to be that neutral person for that kiddo. And so when it comes to handling disclosure and like what can be asked, we say that, and it's part of Child First Protocol, you guys can look that up. It's on zeroabuseproject.org that I'm getting some of this information from. It's just a little handout that it's pretty specific for you. So it's the first response, and it covers the questions that you can ask. So you can ask who, what, where, so that way you get that emergent information, right? We want to make sure that kid is in a safe place first and foremost. So you can ask who, you can ask what, and you can ask where. When is a little tricky. From research, we know that kiddos have a hard time giving time frames just because that's something that they can't do very often. Time to them is very difficult. However, it is important when it comes to the medical side of things because we want to make sure that we're seeing those kids within a time frame to get that medical evidence. And so when it comes to that, kids tend to, anytime we do get a time frame, most of the time it's around a birthday, it's around a holiday, what was going on at the time, that had happened to you, getting those surrounding information to help kind of with that when question. And then also, those are basically the only questions that we want you to ask because it's my job to ask those clarifying questions because I'm a trained professional, and to ask those in a kid appropriate setting where they feel safe, open-ended questions, and having those investigators there so that way they're not being questioned by multiple people. It's only one person that they're talking to.
What happens if I don't have all that information? Is that still okay? If I have the who and maybe the what, but I don't know where, or I know something happened, but I don't know who caused it, is that okay to still go ahead, and will that still be helpful for you when you have to do an interview?
Yeah, make that report. Go ahead and do it because that's what I'm here for, to figure out that information, and I'm trained to get those answers. So that's my job to be able to do that. Your job is to make that report. You don't have to have all that information. Honestly, you can just, if you even have just a worry that something's happened to this kid, that's all we need. So if you don't feel comfortable asking the who, what, when, where, don't do it. Just because then you're going to be stuck in a situation where you're like, oh, I don't know where to go from here. And so it's much easier just to kind of let me do that part unless you do have that information handy for when you do call DHS or law enforcement. Because if you do call the DHS hotline, they will ask a lot of questions. So the most information that you have on hand is going to be the best for you because they will ask you some information regarding the child. So have that ready and on hand for when you do call. Yeah.
And so what happens if I ask too many questions? If I keep pressing the child, or I'm asking them to repeat what they've told me, maybe to someone else. Let's say, Ronnie and I are here, and I bring the kid over and I say, so tell Ronnie what you just told me. And then we just start questioning them. What does that do for the Abbott House and the investigation? I can imagine that's probably not great for the child, but for everyone else, what does that look like?
Right. And you're totally right. That's definitely not the putting the child first. We're making sure that we want to have that one person who's trained to talk to that kiddo for sure. But the way that it affects an investigation is part of my protocol that I follow that's nationally recognized. It's been studied and it's found that I ask questions in a different way. So I can't repeat questions that the kiddos has already been asked. And then, so if I'm getting in that scenario and they say, oh, well, I've told so-and-so about this and they asked me all about it, right? So then I have to step out and say, hey, this kiddo was talked to before, and I can't defend continuing this interview with this child in court because my protocol calls for only not asking repetitive questions and making sure that I'm one of the only people to get that information. So yeah, so let's not ask clarifying questions. Just let me do that. And yeah.
Thank you so much. And I know it is also important for everyone that when you are making that report, use the exact words that the child used. I know one of the things that we tend to do when we're around children is replace some of their vocabulary with our own. And that might be for clarity, or it might be, well, I think that's what they meant. So I'll it's also interview the report that we're keeping the language. So I know we do that as well. And that does kind of bring us into our next topic, which is the initial response shapes the investigation. So I would love for Candy to speak to, the timeline that Ronnie mentioned earlier and how that impacts your medical, because that's a huge component to our investigations and to just helping the children.
So you froze for just a moment there. So I think I heard everything that you said. So yes, like I said, I'm the medical director here, but I'm also a trained child abuse medical provider and a family nurse practitioner. So what I do here is I see the children in all of the contexts of abuse, like Casey was saying. So we see lots of different forms of maltreatment, and we have to do certain things with each one of those. So I'm going to make this as least complicated as I can so that you can kind of get the idea of, medically speaking, and for the health and the well-being of a kid, why it's really important for you to respond appropriately to something that they might say, or if you have a suspicion about something, and making that report to DHS and law enforcement. So medically speaking, if you delay a report or if you just don't report at all, you're really putting that child at risk for lots of different things. And there are really, there can be real consequences, not just to the investigation, but like I said, more importantly, there are a lot of risks to the child's health that can be immediate and they can be long-term. And so what I do is I calculate all of those risks and I determine, where do we go from here? What are the possibilities? Can we collect evidence? Does the kid have wounds that need to be taken care of? There's all kinds of things that I have to think about all the time. We do have some very specific timeframes medically that we do need to follow to make sure that there's an optimal outcome, not just for the investigation, but also for the welfare of the child. So we have to think about certain things. Generally speaking, we do have a 72-hour time frame to do certain things for really small kids. So any kid that hasn't gotten to puberty yet, we generally think of a 72-hour time frame to be able to help them the best that we can. Older kids who have already gotten to puberty, we generally think in terms of a 120-hour time frame. But even then, some of those specific pieces, even for the older kids, require 72 hours. So some of those things probably don't immediately pop up in your head. So that's why they need to come to a specialized provider like me. Not all healthcare providers out there in the community are trained to be able to take care of these types of kids. So, I have specialized training that would be no different than sending a kid to a cardiologist or a lung doctor or an immunologist or any of those specialties. We all specialize for a reason. And so I'm really privileged here to be able to specialize in this and be able to help kids. So some of the things that we need to think about for our babies is, number one, if you delay or you don't report at all, we do lose the chance to collect some of the evidence that might be required on the investigative side. So we have to be able to do that to really put the investigation together like as a whole thing. Some of the other things that we risk would be being able to document wounds or injuries or those types of things. So we know that wounds heal. If we delay, we're going to miss our opportunity to be able to document those things. Bruises heal, cuts go away. And when we think of sexual abuse, any type of injury in the genital area or the anal area heals really, really fast. So if you go outside of that 72 hours, we're going to miss those things, not only for potential treatment, but for documentation that might be really important to the investigation. So we've got to be able to get that done. Some of the other things that are really important is we want to be able to provide some of our kids with pregnancy prevention. We want to be able to provide our kids with what we call prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infections. And what that means is we have an opportunity to prevent it. If a kid is within that time frame, I can give them or get them to a place where they can get medication so that they don't end up with an infection that they didn't ask for. And some of those infections, if we let this go on and on, some of our girls will end up infertile. They won't be able to have babies eventually. And so we really need to be thinking about not just immediate healthcare concerns, but also those long-term things that really matter to our kids, and really kind of poke holes in the process in order to give them a chance to have optimal health outcomes as adults. We really need to address all of the mental health concerns that might go with a kid being victimized in any single way. Even if a kid is just witnessing domestic violence, those kids, studies show that they are automatically going to have risks that are going to cause them to have poor health outcomes as an adult. So we really have to be thinking about those things. We have to consider suicidal ideation because of the stress of trauma. We have to think about kids doing things that are harmful to themselves, like cutting, taking drugs, drinking alcohol, being promiscuous. There are a lot of things. One of the other things that we address is strangulation. And you know, strangulation doesn't always come with bruises, but it can come with very serious consequences. And we need to be able to catch that quickly in order to really make sure a kid is okay. So we have to think about those. One of the things too that's so important is that we are able to care for the safety of the child. If you delay or you don't report at all, you're kind of leaving that kid in a situation where they're going to be re-victimized over and over and over. And that becomes really toxic for our kids. And then they end up with really risky behaviors because they don't know what else to do with the stress. So you have to let us take care of that in a timely fashion for sure. You know, like Ronnie was saying, you know, not all injuries can be seen. So you have to get the kid to a place where somebody can see those things. So suspicion, it counts for a lot. You know, there are these things that are called sentinel injuries, and a simple bruise on the top of the ear of a 2-year-old is a big deal. To me, it's huge because the baby can't speak for himself usually. And that's an indication that maybe the baby had some head trauma. So there's some really complex things that really do need to be addressed in a timely fashion. And if they're not, we're leaving our kids at risk for so many things, medically and health-wise. So super important. Suspicion counts. So if you even suspect that a kid is being abused in any way, sexually, physically, if they're being neglected, neglect is one of the biggest forms of abuse that we have. And that can be gray. It's hard to recognize that. So you got to leave it to the professionals, and you've got to get that ball rolling for our kids. And that means that you have to make a report because you're mandated to, you're a mandatory reporter. So, you know, like Tara was saying, it's okay if you don't know all of the information. You still have to do what you need to do to help our kids and let the professionals, you know, provide that specialized care for them. So.
Thank you, Candy. I every time learn something new. So now I know about bruises on ears. I'm gonna keep that. So, you know, now that we've all really talked about, you know, our discipline and how it affects it, you know, I kind of wanted to touch on too that if I'm untrained, because I'm not trained to be a forensic interviewer, and I'm definitely not trained in medical, I think that was obvious. So, you know, if I'm going out and I'm trying to ask all these questions and it's considered I interviewed the child, even though I'm not trained, you know, does that have consequences then for, you know, the rest of the investigation? So if they weren't able to get all the information they needed and we can't talk to the child again because we don't want to further traumatize them, you know, what does that do for moving forward in the investigation, but then also for the types of services that we can provide them and that family later on?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, my interview has to be defensible in court ultimately, and I follow a protocol that's nationally known. And so, for me to be able to continue that interview, I have to be able to justify why I'm asking the questions that I'm asking. If those questions have already been asked, I can't continue that interview. So I have a couple of examples. And this happened just this week, where we had a kiddo disclose to a counselor at school. And the counselor went and got the principal, they called the detective, which are all things, the detective definitely should have been called. However, this kid was pulled into an office and talked to the counselor, a teacher, the principal, and law enforcement all in the same office. And that's just not an appropriate setting for a child to be able to talk about that experience. And not only that, but I can't justify going in and interviewing a kiddo after they've already been asked that. And not just from the investigation side, but imagine from the child's point of view. How do they feel with multiple people in the room while they're trying to disclose some of the most intimate details that they've experienced in their life? So really giving that child that opportunity, if they do come to you, making sure you're in a safe place where it's quiet, where you're the only one that they're talking to, and making sure that that we're not exposing these kids to any more trauma than they need to be. Because this kiddo came into me and in the interview and said, oh, well, my principal, my counselor, the detective, and a teacher were in there with me, and she was pretty bummed out about having to talk about all this again, and I don't blame her. And so we have to meet kids where they're at and understand that they might not want to tell all these people, and it is probably the most child focused if we just have one person talk to them and not clarify questions, and then let me do that, so that way they don't feel like they're having to repeat their story all over again, because it's re-traumatizing to kids ultimately too.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of speak to the services side of things. I talk to the parents while the kids go back and talk to Casey and our other forensic interviewers. And while I'm talking to parents, I'm talking about the reason for a child advocacy center, and that where it's in hopes that kids don't have to tell their story over and over and over throughout an investigation. And sometimes I'm in the middle of saying that, and parents are like, well, this is already number 10. And I'm like, seriously? And they're like, yeah. And they'll explain to me who all they've already had to talk to, and I have to apologize and explain to them that's not how we would like things to go. That's not why. I mean, they started child advocacy centers in order to prevent that, but we are still doing lots of education in our community. And if anybody that's listening to this is a part of a school or a church group, or just anybody that has like lots of children around at different moments, I'm sure Tara will say this, I'm probably stealing her thunder, but we have an educational program that she can come out and she can teach you all about the signs, the symptoms, how to report, kind of like what we're doing here, but even more in depth. And so it's best for the kid, like Casey was saying, is if they can just talk about it that one time. It's different than therapy. A lot of people think of it as therapy, but even though Casey probably, she wants to, as a forensic interviewer, they want to ask, possibly therapy type questions, but it's very, very fact and just trying to get the kids' words. So it's not therapy. And when they do work in therapy, it's a different type. It's not re-traumatizing them, because it's not asking them to tell all those details, which is what a forensic interview is. So that is different, because I think some people try to talk to me about that. They're like, well, if talking to a kid about this is re-traumatizing, then why do we think kids need to go to therapy? So that's a little bit of the difference. I'm sure Casey can speak more to that.
And the interview ultimately is child driven as well, so a kid has full control over what they can and can't share with me. If they come in the room and they tell me, I don't want to talk about that, and then we're not going to talk about it. I don't want to make them talk about things they don't want to talk about. And so making sure that I'm allowing that kid space. We take breaks as often as they need them. And it's really child driven to you're giving, the child is the expert in that situation. And so I want to make sure that I'm allowing that child to give me all the narrative that they possibly can, and me asking the most minimal questions only to clarify and get information for the investigation. So that's my ultimate goal with the interview. And then also a few other things just about with first reactions as well. We know that this can be traumatizing for families to hear this information come out, because we also know that peer-to-peer disclosure is really high. Child to educators is really high. Disclosure is really high. So, it's not uncommon that a kid is not going to disclose to a parent. So we need to think about, families just finding out for the first time. and understanding that like the kids need that safe reaction. And if, you know, families freaking out right after this disclosure, you know, that's not the most appropriate setting to be able to do that. But we do understand that, you know, families are going to and caregivers are going to have a reaction to it. So making sure that we're really putting the kid first when you hear that, and putting your thoughts and feelings aside until you can get that child taken care of immediately. And then also when thinking about investigation wise and interviewing or talking to a kid about specific questions, you know, credibility comes into an interview and an investigation as well. You know, sometimes if you ask a kid more than, which is why I can't ask repeating questions, but if you ask a kid repeating questions, they think, oh, maybe I didn't give the right answer. And so they change it a little bit. Or maybe they're needing some more detail, right? And so they might have, you know, told the mandated reporter one thing, and then they come into the interview and they have all these other details, but they were a little off, right? So we don't want to affect the credibility of the child at all. So really making sure that you're allowing that story to be told one time, so that way the child doesn't feel like they're being questioned multiple times on it, and maybe their story isn't right, or maybe they need to like search for approval or reassurance in their answers. So making sure that we're only doing that will only improve the child's credibility ultimately throughout the investigation.
Yeah, and I like to talk about how also, I think you guys talked about it earlier, but unfortunately, in order to prosecute and to kind of push this thing through the court system, at least here in Cleveland County, our DAs want a forensic interview done. They know the weight that holds. They know our background here at the Abbott House and how trained our forensic interviewers are. And so that's what they want. They want that forensic interview. And so if all these questions get asked before and just all these things happen that make it to where a kid cannot come in here and get a forensic interview, that ultimately messes up the prosecution of them. And so it just kind of stinks. It has, in my, you know, as the victim support coordinator or family advocate, my job is just to try to help make sure that they get any type of resources they need to be able to move through this trauma. And I'm not necessarily focusing on whether this child will get justice or not, but that is a big thing. And these kids, they want to feel heard, and their parents really want to feel heard as well. And so if it gets ruined by too many questions at the front, it kind of stinks. And we know everyone's hearts usually is they're in it for the right reasons. They're asking those questions for the right reasons. But if you're on here and you didn't know these things and you know now, you know, teach a friend or something like that, so that it can help even more kids in our community.
That's perfect. And it's true. We all learn things. I mean, I learn all the time from you guys and share it with other people through Safety in Action or other people in our lives. And, you know, I know we're getting close to having time for a Q&A, but I wanted to ask all of you just to share one thing that you want everyone else to know. It could be about your job, it could be about Abbott House, or it could just be, you know, a little fact, a little tidbit, something to look out for, because I feel so lucky I get to work with these professionals every day and these experts in the field. So I want them to share just one thing. And whoever wants to start can go.
I'll start. Ultimately, I want everyone to know that disclosure is a process. It's not just a one-time event. So really allowing kids that full time to process that disclosure. They might be telling you one thing now, but it's happened for a while. And they're just now getting the courage to tell somebody. And so really taking action when they do, you do have the opportunity. So fully understanding that not just for, you know, even for your own kids, if you do have kids, for any kid that you're in contact with, you know, disclosure is a process and it takes time, and kids do that differently. So understanding that, you know, a kid's might not just come out and tell everything that's happened, and we don't want to expect that of them. So making sure that you're understanding and meeting them where they're at in their disclosure process too.
I'll go next. I would like everyone to know that the referral process and things like that for our different resources, I want people to know that that's here for the community. You don't just have to be here for a case, or have gone through DHS or law enforcement. Like, I've had people call here and say, you know, my kid's struggling with this. Do you have any good recommendations for counseling resources or something like that? We will help. As the advocates here at the Abbott House, we advocate for all children. And so if you need any type of help, or again, like I was saying earlier, if you're just not sure what to do with the situation that you saw and you need some advice, we will help with that as well. So don't be afraid to contact us and ask for an advocate, and we will do our best to help you.
Okay, so the one thing that I want anybody in the community to know who might be reporting any kind of abuse is that we really want to provide an optimal outcome for our kids. And the way that we do that is we get kids to a specialized healthcare provider who understands how to provide care in a trauma-informed way that's in a child-friendly environment that is not going to re-traumatize them. So an emergency department or an urgent care is not the best place for a kid to have to go through this process. So like Casey was saying with the interview, these are very, very intimate and difficult times for children of all ages. So, you know, children have to show me their bodies sometimes. Sometimes I have to photograph children. Sometimes I have to look at the places where nobody else is supposed to be looking. And so that's really hard, really difficult, especially if they've been traumatized in the ways that we've been saying. And so, you know, we want to be very careful to understand that a child advocacy center is the place where a kid comes so that they can be in a safe place when they have to show their body, or they have to have a medical examination, or we have to talk about their bodies and kind of what they experience, and in a place where they can receive treatment that's appropriate. So, you know, sometimes there are things that I cannot provide for children, and I do have to refer kids to other places like gynecology or urology or certain places like that. Not very often, but sometimes they do need a different type of specialist. But for the most part, you know, coming here is going to provide them with the specialized services in a place where, you know, they have an advocate present, they have the forensic interviewer present, everybody's already present and providing that safe place so that child feels supported. And they feel like it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable here. If you could imagine a kid going to an emergency department with an untrained provider or an urgent care, it sounds like the worst thing I can think of, you know, is to be in a really clinical environment where people are coming in and out of the room and who knows what's happening, and there's loud noises and things are going on. That doesn't sound very therapeutic to me. So I think it's important for the community to know that when kids come here, it's a whole different ball game, and they deserve to have that specialized care in a safe place like this for the worst day of their life, and the intimate care or the intimate details that are going to come out. We owe that to our kids, and so that's what we provide here. When you start that ball rolling and they end up here, you know, they get all of the wraparound services that they need in a safe place.
Thank you. I guess I'll share mine before we do Q&A. My main thing is that you don't have to work at a child advocacy center to advocate for children. And not just because the law says that we're all mandated reporters, but we all have the ability to protect the children in our lives and to create safer communities and safer futures for these children. So, you know, there's a reason why I'm not law enforcement or DHS or medical or an interviewer. I used to be an advocate, but it's because we all have something that we bring to the table. So whatever it is that you're bringing to the table, if it's helping children and you're making that report and you're responding the appropriate way, then you're doing the best thing you possibly can for them. You know, one of the other things is that we've talked about how to handle the disclosure and what to do, but I know we've all mentioned it, but that child saw you as a safe person. And so being that supportive person is oftentimes the best thing that you can do, other than making the report, of course. Sometimes children, the people that are in their home or their caregivers aren't the supportive people in their life. So you might be that person for that child, and the outcomes for their future, become much better once we have a CAC involved and someone has made a report. So it's a lot of pressure on all of us, but I think it's good pressure to have that we all know that we're responsible. And so that would be my thing. And, if we have any questions, we can have them in the chat box, and Jennifer can let us know, and we'll look. If not, I'll have my email posted on social media, so you guys can always check back. We have our names, of course, and our title next to our name. So if you go on our website and you have a specific question for Candy, Casey, Ronnie, Jennifer, myself, you can always just shoot us an email. That's perfectly fine. So I'll give a couple minutes for that, but I also just wanted to thank everyone for being here today. I know this is a hard time of the day. It's also a Friday, and the end of Child Abuse Prevention Month. So I know we've all been doing this every day. So I just really appreciate all of you and hope that there's something that you can take away from what we did today. So.
It looks like we don't have any questions, but thank you so much for everybody. Oh, actually we do. We do have one question. Can you speak to how interviews are scheduled? We know you've been swamped.
So we get interviews referred to us through law enforcement and DHS. There has to be an open investigation. And so when you do make that when you do call and make that report to either law enforcement or DHS, they then reach out to us and they say, hey, we have this kiddo that we need to have interviewed. And so then we just put them on our schedule, and that's kind of how we do it. And then we go through and we cover and we get to staff this case and talk about it as a team and how we want to best serve each kid.
I'd like to add to that if I can. It's good to know too that not every kid that needs to be seen medically will get a forensic interview. So like, for example, if a kid is really young and they don't have the verbal skills to participate in an interview, we can still provide advocacy and medical services to the family and to that child. And so the process is kind of the same. If for any reason a kid can't be interviewed, they can still come for other services. So we would never deny medical services or advocacy services just because an interview can't happen. Obviously, we want to interview our children for all of the reasons that Casey gave, but our services have some independence, and we work together, but all of the pieces can happen without the other. So, having said that, I do want to reiterate that you really don't want to be questioning kids, because we want all of the pieces to work together for sure. But if there's some crazy reason that we can't do medical or do interviews, like with a child who's much too young, we can still provide the other services for sure. And those services still have to come, medical services still have to come through DHS and law enforcement. And sometimes they will call and just schedule medical, with advocacy services and not necessarily an interview. So we can provide, just kind of a specialized way to take care of each kid that needs to come to the house. So.
And also off of that, just so everyone knows, a heads up, that we interview kiddos from the age of 3 to 18, and mentally disabled adults as well. And so, we want to see every kid that you guys have. Like Candy said, I mean, it could be a 2-year-old that might not have the communication skills to quite be interviewed, but they need to be seen medically, or the family needs advocacy. So we can still do that.
Okay, it looks like we kind of cut out for a second. Sorry about that, everybody. We do have
anything. Everyone was frozen.
Sorry about that. So we do have a couple other questions. Somebody asks, do we accept requests for interviews from other counties?
Yes, we serve Cleveland, Garvin, and McLean counties, but we do serve some outlier counties. Some Oklahoma County comes here. It just kind of depends. If you call here, our intake coordinator can decide if we're the Child Advocacy Center to come to or not.
Okay, and somebody asked, for some of our new team members, can we also speak to the detectives who work from Mary Abbott House versus the Norman Investigation Center?
Yeah, I can do that one. So right now we have 2 detectives that are from the Norman Police Department that are on site at Abbott House, and they are working on internet crimes. So they are doing all things with phones, videos, pictures, all of that forensic information. So right now we don't have any other law enforcement that are on site all the time in our suite, but we do have the ability in a whole office suite for any investigator to come over and work out of these offices. In the past, we have had detectives that split their time between the Norman Investigation Center and Mary Abbott House, but it really just depends on, you know, what's going to be more conducive for their work schedule and all the cases they have. So right now we just have the 2 from Norman PD that are doing the internet crimes, but we have space to grow.
We have about 3 to 5 that do child crimes with the Norman Police Department, but they are housed at the Norman Investigation Center, or the NIC, some people call it. And so there's about, like I said, anywhere between 3 and 5 that we see very regularly because they get the child crime investigations.
Did we answer the Karen's question about do we accept requests for interviews from other counties?
Yeah.
We answered that one? Okay, I just want to make sure we got it covered.
Yeah, and it looks like that may be the last of our questions, but we did have one more question about do we have any volunteer opportunities or any job opportunities here? And I can speak to that. We absolutely have volunteer opportunities. We love to have volunteer groups come and help out with the house, clean up outside in the yard. We have a great playground that that kids can come and play in, and sometimes we have yard work that needs to be done, that kind of thing. But we also have a great need for people to come and be child advocates. So what they would do is when a family comes in, they'll sit with the family, they'll sit with the child, play with the child, talk to them, just make them feel very comfortable while they're here. And we absolutely need help with that. So if you're interested in that, you can go on to our website, abbott-house/volunteer, and learn more about our volunteer opportunities, or you can email me at jskinner@abbott-house.org. Also, as far as job opportunities, check out our website. We do occasionally have opportunities for open positions or for intern positions, and those are going to be on under the About Us section on our website. So, and again, our website is abbott-house.org. So I think that's all the questions we have, unless I see any others. Tara, you want, or I keep saying Tara, I'm so sorry. Okay. Tara, would you like to finish us out?
Yes, I would love to. So thank you again, everyone who joined in. This is recorded, so we will probably send it out to everyone who signed up at a later date. So they can all watch it. You guys can watch it if you have any questions. And then, like Ronnie mentioned earlier, I do also our educational outreach, so safety and action. So if there was any part of this that you want to know more about the forms of abuse and the mandated reporting law, and say hi to Eleanor, who's with Ronnie, you can go on our website, and it's under our services, education. So you can request a presentation. I can do it virtual or in person. Also do social media safety for children and for adults, and it's all free. So yeah, definitely let us know. And like I said, I'll post our emails later. So if you have any questions, I always think of things later that I want to ask. So I get it. We'll be here for you. So thank you so much.